So I think we can start. Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen, respected colleagues, participants, and guests. My name is Margarita Smolkina, and we are deeply honored to have you here with us at Institute of Foreign Languages of RUDN University. It is our great pleasure to welcome you to our Interuniversity Student Scientific and Practical Conference with international participation, public relations as a brand awareness booster. The purpose of the conference is to attract the students' attention of the master's program, Theory of Communication and International Public Relations, and students of similar and related areas from other universities in Russia and foreign countries to such important aspects of promoting goods and services as creating an image, maintaining popularity of goods and services, branding and rebranding, communication in branding, and creating enthusiasm and responding to starry consumer requests using modern methods like internet and digital marketing. This year, rich history of our conference is marked with an unprecedented event, due to the global pandemic of our conference is held online via the main platform, Microsoft Teams. Although international borders are closed and we are delighted to have gathered everyone here online, overcoming all the boundaries and obstacles, and we expect our conference to be as fascinating, enlightening, and uniting as it always is. Our conference will start here on Microsoft Teams with a plenary session where we'll listen to a presentation of our respected plenary speakers. And after that, at 12 p.m., we will proceed to Microsoft Teams to hear students' presentations divided into two sections: PR campaign example, tactics, strategies, and measure of success. And the second section is international public relations. And based on the above said, I would like to introduce you Angela Higgins, MBA, undergraduate session instructor at Concordia University of Edmonton, experienced business professional with 20 years of business and consumer marketing expertise, Canada. She has an extensive experience working with such companies as Benkiser Canada, Warner Lambert, Kraft Canada Incorporation, Weston and Smucker Food of Canada, and also well-known Coca-Cola Canada Limited. Angela was my strategical marketing teacher when I studied under Open Studies Educational Exchange Program of Concordia University of Edmonton. It's in Canada. And the theme of the report is branding, even more important now in the age of social media. And with that being said, I shall pass the floor over to our first plenary speaker, Angela Higgins.
Thank you very much, Margarita. Nice to see some of you. I'll just share my screen and show you my presentation.
Dear Angela, okay.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to talk about branding, title of my presentation, even more important now in the age of social media. And I know that this conference is the focus of it is about public relations. But I think that branding and a discussion about branding is a really good place to start because in my opinion, in my experience, public relations is a tool for you to communicate your brand. So as I talk about branding and and throughout the day, you're thinking about public relations, think about public relations as how am I communicating my brand to my consumers. And I hope to explain to you over the next few minutes why it's really important to be communicating a brand to your consumers. So I'll get started and and we'll go. The agenda, I'm going to talk about what branding really is. I'm going to walk you through my thinking on why branding is very critical right now to marketers today. And then we're going to look at sort of 3 up and coming trends of why branding will continue to be quite critical in the future. And then I know we've set aside some time for Q&A. So what is branding? Branding is really an activity in which a company uses a name, phrase, design, symbol, even a sound to identify its products. So as Margareta had said, I worked for Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is probably one of the best traditional symbols of excellent branding. The shape of that Coca-Cola bottle that's there on the screen, they've actually trademarked it. So no other company can use that shape legally, can't use that shape to sell their products or beverages. The way that you sort of put branding together, obviously there'll be a name for your brand, but there's so much more to it. As I've mentioned, the shape, but even sound. Think about Netflix. When you turn Netflix on, you see the visual of the red N building, but there are also sounds associated with Netflix that everyone now knows. They can hear the sound, they know that that is Netflix. So there's a lot of components that actually go into creating a brand in a consumer's mind. And then the interesting thing is that as you develop a brand in that consumer's mind, your brand starts to develop a personality. And what we mean by that in marketing is we think of a brand personality as a set of human characteristics. So if you were to describe a brand, let's say Apple, as a person, if Apple was a person sitting beside you right now, how would you describe that person? Where would Apple live? Would they live in a high-rise condo, or would they live in a cabin in the woods? Would Apple, how much money would Apple make? What gender would Apple be? What kind of car would Apple drive? That's an exercise that you can do both with your own market, like internally in your company, but we do it a lot with consumers. And it's a really great way for us to go back and test, here's the brand we were trying to develop. We were trying to develop a brand that was very technologically forward, that's perceived to be high end. For instance, Apple or Tesla, a lot of these companies are like that. Are our consumers seeing our brand the same way? And it's hard for consumers to talk about brand. They can describe it, but what's the emotion that they feel about it? What do they think about the brand in a more holistic term? When you ask them to describe your brand personality, so describe it as if it's a person, you start to get a lot of rich data about how they really perceive the brand. As a side note, we were doing research years ago when I was at Coke on one of our juice brands, and we thought we had a brand that said wholesome and loving and caring and family. And we did research with consumers, and they were like, tired, old, my grandparents' juice, never want to drink it. There was a real disconnect between what we thought was the brand personality and the branding versus what consumers did. So the brand personality is really critical because it really sort of sets the brand in the consumer's mind. All of this leads up to something called brand equity. You can also call it brand value. It's really the added value, all the extra that the brand has way beyond its functional benefits. So when you drink a Coke, you can drink a Coke because you're thirsty, okay? And when you drink it, then you're hydrated. You feel no longer thirsty. But you're not drinking a Coke just because you're thirsty. If you were, you'd only just drink water. You might drink a different brand. You wouldn't necessarily care whether it was a Coke or not. You're drinking a Coke for the added value that it gives to you. And and that added value it gives to you as a consumer translates into brand equity for the company. Now, how does that happen? Basically, consumers start off within brand loyalty just at recognizing your brand. You know, they're like, oh yeah, I've heard of Tesla before, I've heard of Apple before. They kind of have some recognition. And they'll consume it if it's around, but they're not that loyal to it. It doesn't really matter which brand they have. As you build branding and brand personality and brand equity into your brand, and consumers develop a stronger emotional connection to your brand, then they go from just recognizing your brand to preferring your brand. So you go into a restaurant and your server says, we have Pepsi and we have Coke. And you're like, I think I'll have a Coke, because you've developed a stronger affinity or preference for Coke. And that's good for the company. Financially, that's good for the company when you choose Coke over Pepsi, assuming you're the Coke company. The next level, and the desired level by companies, is that you get your consumers to the level of insistence. Because if you go into a restaurant and you say, I'd like a Coke, and they say, well, we only have Pepsi. If you're only at a preference level, you're like, well, I still want a cola, so I'll drink Pepsi. And that's a loss for the company. But if you go into a restaurant and ask for a Coke and they say, well, we only have Pepsi, and you say, I won't have anything, I won't consume the competitive brand, you're now at that level of insistence. I want a Coke. That helps the company in a number of ways, because consumers are telling restaurants and other places, I'm only going to drink a Coke. And if you're not going to sell me a Coke, you're not going to get my business, or certainly I'm not going to buy that type of product from you. And it also really leads to a lot more of consumer communication out to their friends and family and through social media about brands that they insist on. And that's, something that I'm going to talk about in sort of a few minutes. That in a nutshell is sort of the big concept of what branding is all about. So I think I'll keep going, and I guess we'll have questions and answers at the end. So we'll go on. Okay, so I've got a little exercise. Anybody who wants to participate, and I'm doing this because it's actually interesting how you don't have to see the brand name or even all of a logo of a company to know which brand that is. Is there anybody who recognizes which brand this is?
Starbucks.
Yes, exactly. Here's another one. Which brand is this?
MasterCard.
Exactly. Do you see how they're just, we've got two circles on a page here, but you know what brand that is. That's amazing that they have developed the brand to that level, whether you like the brand or not. But there's a lot more to the brand than just the name. And here's one more.
IKEA.
Yeah. IKEA. Exactly. Yes. Good. That's always an exercise I love to do with my students, just to show them different brands. And it's amazing the number of brands that you can recognize without ever seeing the brand name. It's quite amazing. So I'll talk just for a couple of minutes about branding in the past. The big thing about branding when marketing was in its infancy, so probably 100 years ago, at least within North America, is that there was very little segmentation. And in the next slide, I'm going to talk about what segmentation is. But basically, all the products were just sold to everybody, same product for every single person. Henry Ford, who started Ford Motors, very famously said, you can have any color as long as it's black, okay? It doesn't matter if you want red and you want green, everybody gets the same color. And at the same time, everybody got the same product benefits and size and functionality. All of that was all the same for every single person. There was really no recognition of different consumer needs. And I mean, we'll talk about it in a second, but just think about how consumer needs differ across different groups of people. If you are a young person going to university and you need to buy a vehicle versus your parents who have a family of 3 or 4, 5 people, lots of kids, you know, doing grocery shopping and maybe sports and things like that. The needs of you as a university student or recently graduated, something like that, versus a parent, very, very different in what you would want in a vehicle. You know, you might want a 2-seater red sports car with that, you know, all your friends are jealous of. Now, whether you can afford that is a different thing, but that's what you need. That's what you really want versus the parent wanting a large SUV that fits all their kids and all their camping equipment and, you know, everything else. Those are two very different vehicles. And that kind of recognition of different needs did not exist when branding really started. It was really in its infancy. So it's, you know, just very basic print media. And then they transitioned into radio, which allowed for more sort of storytelling. But anyway, that's just sort of setting the stage of that's where branding was. So branding today is a lot more focused on what we call targeted segmentation. So this is what I was talking about in the last slide of sort of two, you know, different groups having different needs. What targeted segmentation means is you literally divide the total market for a product into homogeneous groups. So you have many different groups, and with the people within each of those groups are fairly homogeneous. They have fairly similar likes, needs, wants, tastes, attitudes, beliefs, values. One thing I do really want to stress is that originally when marketers were doing segmentation, probably back in sort of the 80s, 90s, they mainly focused on demographics. So if you were 20 years old and living in this geographic area and making this amount of money, you would want this type of car and listen to this type of music and want these types of clothes. It's very demographically focused. And we've really evolved now to understand that, while demographics can play a part, attitudes, beliefs, and values are actually much more indicative of the products that consumers need and want and gravitate to, buy, have an affinity for. So while it's sort of, when you're sort of first in marketing, you think a lot about demographics, and that's an easy one to group different, you know, make different consumers. So you've got a consumer group that's teenagers versus young adults versus older adults versus seniors, you know, that the age is that demographic. They may not all have, all the teenagers in that group might not all have the same attitudes, beliefs, and values. You know, within that group, maybe there's a huge variation on the attitude towards climate change. And so, you know, the desire for certain products can vary significantly depending on what those teenagers feel about climate change. You can't assume that all teenagers are aware that climate change is a significant issue and needs to be dealt with, and every product that they should buy should reflect, you know, our climate crisis that we're facing. Just like you can't assume that every senior citizen who, you know, is you know, close to the end of their life, and, you know, that they don't care about climate change at all. You know, my father is 78, 75 years old. And his next vehicle will be an electric vehicle, because he's realizing where we're at as a planet, and that he, as along with everybody else, has to make changes. So it's a long-winded way, sorry, I'm saying demographics can be a starting point, but you need to take yourself, your brand, your marketing beyond just demographics, and really do research into attitudes, beliefs, values. By doing that, you're then actually going to be able to target with strong communication to the right consumers. And one of those key tools of communication is PR. You need to have the right messaging built into your public relations so that you're actually having strong communication, strong dialogue with your consumers. Now, there are a number of different branding strategies that are available to consumers, and I've got examples for each one of these. The first one is multi-product brand. Another one is you have many different brands within one company. There's another one called private label. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. You can do co-branding. We have multiple brands on one product, and then licensing is another option. So I'll just show you some examples. Under Armour, pretty global brand. They use the same symbol no matter what the product is. It goes across so many different products, and you always know that that's one brand, Under Armour, just having multiple products within that one brand. Nestle, on the other hand, one of the biggest companies in the world, they've got like 2,000 different brands around the world. And there are a lot of reasons for this. Acquisition, if they've bought companies around the world, they would buy the brands, and often it'd be too costly, like financially costly, to change the brand name. It can also be harmful. They would lose too many consumers if they change the brand name. And they're also in so many different categories that calling everything Nestle probably wouldn't work. It'd be too confusing for consumers. So they just manage, thousands of brands, literally. Private label, this is an interesting one. So I'm from Canada. Private label is very strong there. It's in terms of sort of dollar share of all sales in Canada, it's just under 20%. Switzerland is one of the it's one of the highest in the world at about 45%. I included Turkey and Russia. Turkey because I'm here right now. Somewhat well developed. Russia is actually not that well developed at the moment. So there's a huge opportunity in Russia to develop private label. And private label is literally where the retailer, the store, sells their own brand of product. And there's a lot of examples around the world of how that evolution happens within the minds of consumers. It's generally starts off as consumers not always trusting the quality of the product, and it takes time for retailers to demonstrate that the quality of their product is as good as the branded product. So that's another form of branding. And it has been interesting to see the development around the world of that one. I searched up, I think that this is a private label brand in Russia. My apologies because I don't speak Russian, but the article I read said that one was. So anyway, and then another example of a type of branding is co-branding. So the top left, we've actually got 3 brands on there: Glad, Gain, and Febreze. Haagen-Dazs with Bailey's. So you can see that there are opportunities to bring 2 brands together that makes sense. Being together, that there's a affinity or a benefit to the consumer and the brands by connecting them. And then last is licensing. So just the McDonald's monopoly example, at least in North America, every year McDonald's runs a game, and the more product you buy from McDonald's, the more monopoly you can play and then win prizes. So that's for them been a great licensing opportunity. And the other one is there's a Harry Potter licensing. Many movies do licensing of their brand into products. So those are some different branding examples. Now I want to talk to you first about sort of 3 trends that are really critical, why branding is really critical now, and then we'll talk about sort of 3 things that will continue to mean that branding is very critical. So the 3 significant reasons why branding is so critical right now. Number one is commoditization coupled with massive increases in product selection. So commoditization is where like everything in the category is just the same. You get same features, benefits, color, whatever it is. Think toothbrushes, or even a lot of times like TVs and laptops. A lot of what is available in a category is virtually indistinguishable from the rest of the competition. It almost doesn't matter which one you buy. And at the same time, there's just a shitload, there's just a ton of options for consumers. And so it makes it really, really difficult for consumers to figure out, am I buying toothbrush A versus B versus C, D, E, because they all look the same and they do the same thing, and I don't understand the difference. And if you don't develop branding, including, public relations and messaging to consumers, you're not telling your consumers why does my toothbrush stand out as being better, and it's not just toothbrush A, it's Crest toothbrush, or it's Colgate toothbrush, or whatever it is, whatever the brand is, and that's better than all those other faceless, nameless toothbrushes. Insert any category you want there. That's what consumers are faced with. You've got to break through all the commoditization and the too many choices and all of that. So that's sort of the first one, why branding is really critical now, and therefore why PR as a communication tool is also really important. The second one is what we're calling a power shift to consumers. Consumers can now have like a really significant effect on businesses. Think about the access to information. Every time you pick up your smartphone, you can shop, comparison shop, read reviews, watch reviews. Think about it. Is there anybody here who doesn't read reviews online or watch YouTube reviews online before making any significant purchase? Probably not. Even just to go to a restaurant, you read the Google reviews, you read what people have posted, you look at the pictures. Consumers have a significant amount of power now. It is not marketers saying, you need this, here's what you need, I've given it to you, you're welcome. It's marketers trying to connect with consumers by knowing their consumers, by segmenting them and communicating real value to them, knowing their beliefs and what's important to their consumers, and being able to connect with them. Because consumers have the power right now, they have significant amount of power to choose which brand, which product, which company they want to buy from. And then the last one that's important right now is this thing called changing value proposition. So consumers are really starting to rethink, what's the value I'm getting out of this brand? Why am I buying it from the grocery store or the department store, in the mall, versus ordering it on Amazon? What value is this brand giving me? Again, it's kind of related to this power shift to consumers, where consumers are questioning, what benefits am I getting out of this brand? And they're not always buying and believing, they're not always buying into and believing everything that marketers are saying. The stronger that your brand is in the minds of consumers, the better that your public relations and your communication to consumers are, the more they will see the value of your brand and not question it as much. The more you don't connect and communicate with your consumers, the more they fall into this problem of commoditization and really start to question, what value. So you have to be constantly reminding your consumers through a number of communication tools, including PR, what's the value that they're getting out of the brand. Okay, so that's why branding is still really critical for today's marketers. All right. Now let's talk about 3 reasons why branding is really critical for the future. So the first one, and remember, these all build on, it's not like the first 3 go away in the future. Like this is just all building. First one is media fragmentation, okay, and hyper segmentation. So I talked to you about segmentation, about dividing your consumers up into groups of similar homogeneous people. Media is becoming so fragmented. Back in the 70s, when you advertised a product, you advertised in magazines, on TV, maybe some billboards. It wasn't a lot of option. And you could really control the message. You could really make sure you blitzed consumers. Social media has blown that all up. You know, we're audiences are leaving television watching in droves. If they are watching television, they're also on their phones and on social media at the same time often. And so what you end up with are just so many different ways, media, that you can communicate with your consumers. And also, because of social media, you're ending up with an audience that are they're very focused on really specific interests. And it's not like you can't group very large groups of people and say, oh, this group are all interested in basketball, okay? They may all be interested in basketball, but they still have extremely different interests within basketball. So, you know, I'm originally from Toronto. We have the Raptors. I don't know if you guys have heard of them, but they did win a couple of years ago, the NBA championship. So we're proud of them. My son and I are total Raptors fans. We love them. But the way he approaches basketball and the way I approach it, two totally different things. He listens to podcasts. He's following them on Instagram. I'm following them on Instagram, but for different reasons. From like more a mom perspective, I'm so proud of them. And you know, so even though we have that overall interest of basketball, we're very fragmented on how we love the brand of the Raptors. So that's sort of the first one. The second one is globalization. It's just massive growth of global brands. You know, I've mentioned some here: Apple, Samsung, Tesla. When we did the small little exercise of guess that brand, those are three other global brands. And so you end up with really big global brands and then small local brands trying to compete with those. If you are a global brand, your communication through PR and other tools about your brand has to be really well aligned. You don't want to communicate that Apple is a iPhone tech company in North America and it's only about a watch company in Europe. Those are two different messages. You need to have alignment around the globe of what your brand is all about. If you're a smaller company trying to fight those global brands, you need to find a message that resonates with your consumers that you can deliver through different ways of communication, including PR, of why you're different, what value your brand delivers over those global brands. And then lastly is user-generated content meeting AI. Okay, so we have so many different social media platforms, and obviously I've only just mentioned a few of them here. These platforms allow consumers to create their own content, and we as marketers have absolutely no control over that. We don't. They can say anything about our brand, and we can rarely ever change their mind, stop them from saying it. It's a futile exercise to try and control the message of user-created content. What you hope to do as a marketer is to influence it. And you influence it by creating your own content, but also identifying those people who are strong influencers. You use the data that you can get out of social media to try to influence the message. And PR through social media is a good way. Once you study the data, understand it, understand your consumers and the messaging that's important to them, then you can start to use social media and do PR through social media to really try to influence your consumers. and the messaging that they're delivering. So all of these trends, the ones I talked about of why branding's so important now, and these ones that are really starting to develop, media fragmentation, globalization, user-generated content, those are all really going to continue to be very, very important as marketers really focus on making sure our brands are breaking through all of the messaging that consumers have. And then I just have one last slide, which I thought was a good example of how it's a Chinese, I think it's a Chinese or an Asian cell company, don't know how to pronounce them, Meizu, who they've partnered with Mariaway. So instead of just trying to do their own advertising, which consumers we don't consume, we skip over the sponsored ads on Instagram and things like that. But if there's somebody who you follow on your preferred social media platform who partners with a company, and if they're doing it well, that's authentic, that fits with the way that person posts normally, and it can really add to your brand as a marketer. By, for instance, in this example, Maria communicating the beauty of the cell phone, and that would probably really fit with her overall posting style, if you want to call it that. So this company has done a good job of kind of blending that user-created content with the messaging that they want to get to their consumers about their cell phone. So that's my talk on branding and why it's so important. And I'll stop sharing.
Dear Angela, thanks a lot for joining us and for such a wonderful presentation. And dear participants of our conference, do you have any questions to our speaker, Angela? You can raise your virtual hand and ask our speaker, or write your questions down in our chat. Yes, please, Diana.
Yeah, thank you. Angela, could you tell us what important questions do you think a person should ask himself or herself when developing his or her own branding strategy while maybe searching for company's personality?
Okay, that's a good question. The questions. Okay, I'm going to assume it's an established brand and you're really trying to understand the brand personality. I would do it in two ways. I would first do it within the company and ask, how would, if my brand was sitting here beside me as a person, how would I describe them? And you literally want to ask yourself, where do they live? How much money do they make? What is their gender? What car do they drive? What do they believe in? Do they believe that climate change is real? Do they believe that COVID is real? Like you, in a way, you're asking questions that if you literally were trying to describe your friend sitting beside you, what are the things that you would say about your friend? So you can ask those kind of questions. Where does my brand work? If my brand was a person, where would they work? They would work in a investment company, on a farm, like things like that. So you kind of develop that within your own company, within your marketing team, and then you take it to consumers, and you do the same thing where you say, okay, if Apple was a person, how would we describe Apple? And it's it's good to do it within the company, because then you start to see how people start to describe a brand as a person. It's a really easy exercise, and you as you ask people, your consumers, questions, it then helps you to think about more questions you want to ask. If they say, well, they live in a high rise. Okay, well, a high rise where? Do they live in Moscow? Do they live in Istanbul? Do they live in Los Angeles, New York? You know, what kind of, you know, where in the world do they live? Do they live in a really big, fast-paced city or more in a smaller town? So you have some initial questions and then can start to probe on the answers that they give. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
Some more questions, and next will be from Ksenia Filatova.
Good morning. Angela, could you tell us what is the significance of the color scheme on the psychology of the buyer?
Oh, okay, I'm not going to talk about psychology because I don't have that training, but color is quite important in branding. That's a good point, which I didn't raise. And different colors can mean different things, honestly, depending on the country or the region that you're in. So one starting point, if you're creating a brand new brand, you want to understand the cultural references of certain colors within that region that you're going to launch your brand. And from there, you want to do a survey of brands within that category, because certain categories tend towards certain colors. For instance, at least in North America, you're usually not going to see a lot of brown on most food products unless they're very natural, organic. You'll see more brown. That brown suggests more healthy and organic within food. Black tends to not be a color you see a lot within the grocery department, because black can be depressing or negative and that sort of thing. Usually you see bright colors, very attractive colors. So I'm not certain that fully answers your question, but hopefully that's at least a start.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Please, Alexandra Borisova.
Yes, good morning. Angela, my question is, was branding in the past as effective as it is now? And if not, can you mention any disadvantages of branding in the past?
I'll be honest, I'm not certain that I can fully answer that question. I know I look old, and I am, but I'm not that old. I wasn't around. I haven't studied branding, how effective it was in the first examples that I gave. I mean, in a way, it probably was effective because it was new and consumers hadn't seen it before. But I can't give you exact data on exactly how effective branding was. It did evolve, though. I think it was fine for a while, but then in the sort of the 60s and 70s, when, or even the 50s, 60s, at least in North America, when marketers started to actually be used and started, the use of data science came about. That's when they realized, you know what, consumers have seen the same ads with no segmentation for too long. There's a real opportunity here to use the data to our advantage. And I'm going to make one small plug. If you have the opportunity to watch the TV show Mad Men, it is an amazing television show that demonstrates the evolution of advertising, at least within the US, over that sort of from the 1950s, 1960s, a bit into the 70s. Now there's a heck of a lot of drinking and sex, so I apologize to anybody who doesn't want that part of it, but if you are interested in marketing, and advertising, it's an amazing show. And that might help to answer your question of how it evolved. They literally sort of demonstrate how do you communicate a message to consumers. So
thank you very much. Thank you.
Екатерина Zuldalyeva, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. So first of all, I want to thank you, Angela. It was very interesting. And second of all, I have a question about personal branding. So you have talked about a brand personality. So if a brand was a person, a real character, but what if my personality becomes a brand? So does it work the same way? Is it the same?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. That's good for you to bring that up, because that is an important concept that we often forget about, but we do have a brand personality, and you can do it with yourself. You can do that exercise depending on how comfortable you are receiving feedback. You can do it with your friends, your family, work colleagues. I would start by thinking about your brand personality, like your own brand personality on your own, and write out a bit of an ideal brand personality within a work context. So if you want to be seen as results oriented and always willing to do more, things like that, what kind of marketer do you want to be perceived as? So you set your ideal, here's my ideal brand personality, and then you need to spend some time in, reflecting internally, reflecting on if you have any performance evaluations, anything like that. Also reflecting with colleagues, with other students, and talking about how do they perceive you. So then you get a baseline. Okay, so here's my ideal up here. I want to achieve this brand personality as a marketer, and right now I'm here. Okay, so I sometimes am willing to do more work, or I'm sometimes strategic. I'm sometimes this. What do I need to do from where I am to where I want to get to, so that my brand personality is perceived the way I want it to be perceived? Okay, does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
And we have one more question from Veronika Filimonova.
Yes, good morning to everyone. Angela, thank you for your presentation. And my question is, in your opinion, is a brand name the main recognizable feature in the trade sphere?
I'm going to say yes and no. That's a good question. I think in the beginning, it is probably like when you're first launching a brand. I do think that the brand name is probably the most critical piece of it, because people are saying that name to themselves. They are repeating that name to other people. And initially, they need some sort of a word to be able to communicate about your brand to themselves and to others. You go into a grocery store, if they can't remember the brand name, very hard to go and buy that product, because they're not going to walk up and down the aisles looking for the visual that they remember. So initially, the brand name really is critical. And side note on brand name, you need to think about the brand name within the geographic context that you operate. So my example, I'm from Canada. We speak both English and French, and we have laws related to the amount of French on our packaging. When we do research for a new brand name, we always do research in both English and French to make sure that if we pick a name, that the French people can pronounce it, they can understand it, and they will remember it, and they will not be offended by it. So wherever you are geographically, that's important to take that into account. What languages are spoken in your area? Where do you want to market your brand? Once you've got the brand name development, and don't only do the brand name, like you have to do the shape, the colors, the font of your brand name, all of that need to be really well thought out in the beginning. But as your brand grows, then you can rely more and more on symbols and sounds to communicate your brand. Think about Nike. Most of us only need to see the Nike swoosh to know that brand. And we see the swoosh and the brand name comes into our mind. Okay, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, and last but not the least question is from our chart. Natalia Stanislavna Yerokova writes, Dear Angela, thank you very much for your keynote address, and asks, what do you think about greenwashing trends in branding?
Yes. Well, I mean, honestly, I think it's wrong. And I do believe that consumers are becoming more aware of greenwashing and that they can see through it. In my opinion, I like to be an ethical marketer. And so I strongly encourage you not to greenwash it. And sorry, let me take a step back in case anybody doesn't know what greenwashing is. Greenwashing is an attempt by some marketers to make their product appear more environmentally friendly than it actually is. An oil and gas company spends millions of dollars planting trees in a forest in Europe, and then has an oil spill somewhere else in the world that, kills the wildlife. But they're putting, they're planting trees in, and I'm not saying, I'm sort of thinking off the top of my head, but that can be an example of greenwashing, where you're trying to make your product and your brand look more environmentally friendly than it is. I encourage you not to do it. You either are full on transparent that our product is the way it is, or if you truly believe that we are in a climate crisis, then you need to be open and honest about it and do what you can in a more transparent way and be as environmentally friendly as you possibly can, and own that. Own your efforts to be environmentally friendly. Own the reality of how your company may not be completely environmentally friendly. Does that answer your question?
I think yes. Thank you for your answering, Angela. And now we move to next plenary speaker, Elena Yurievna Navrabiova. Good day. Candidate of philological science, senior lecturer from Lomonosov Moscow State University. It's in Russia. And the theme of the report is color in consumer space. So, Елена Юрьевна, you are welcome.
Добрый день, вы меня слышите? Все нормально?
Да. Вам нужно помочь с трансляцией презентации?
Сейчас я попробую сделать. Надеюсь, что все получится. Так. А где теперь у меня этот экран? Так. Стрелочка. А, вот рабочий стол. Так, все. Видите мой экран, да?
Да, видим.
Так, я буду говорить на русском. Тема моего доклада – динамика цветовой семантики в пространстве общества потребления и взаимодействия культур. Доклад посвящен развитию цветовой семантики французского языка 20-21 веков в пространстве общества потребления в условиях межкультурной коммуникации. Мы рассмотрим изменения в номинациях цвета под влиянием процессов глобализации и роста интереса к товарам потребительского спроса. В современном обществе процесс создания цветовых номинаций представляет интеграцию различных концептов и соединение разных концептуальных понятий в человеческом сознании. В результате взаимодействия культур появляются цветообозначения, в которых в качестве цветового референта используются факты неродной культуры, что используется маркетологами в рекламных целях для создания оригинального имиджа продукта и привлечения покупателей. Мы приводим результаты исследования коннотативного потенциала цветообозначений французского языка 20-21 веков на примере французских товаров повседневного спроса, таких как ткани, косметические средства, краски для интерьера, автомобили. Согласно данным исследованиям, товары сферы потребления получают оригинальные цветовые номинации, которые указывают не только на цветовой оттенок, но и создают многочисленные коннотации, провоцирующие покупателя на когнитивную деятельность. С помощью цветообозначений производители стремятся максимально стимулировать воображение покупателя и активизировать нужные эмотивные состояния. Под влиянием положительно эмоционально окрашенных номинаций цвета в сознаниях потребителей создаются ассоциативные образы, представления, воспоминания, мотивирующие его на совершение покупки. Актуальность данного исследования заключается в восстановлении мотивационных и лингвопсихологических связей между цветообозначением французского языка и фактами глобального мира, а также в определении ценностных предпочтений современных носителей французского языка при выборе цветового прототипа в процессе переноса цветового оттенка на предмет действительности. Цветовые образы и представления, по-французски это imagerie cérébrale, являются предметом изучения нового направления в области маркетинга, нейромаркетинга, который анализирует реакции человеческого сознания под воздействием цвета. Ученые обнаружили, что при принятии быстрых решений цветовые ассоциации являются своего рода триггером, так как, будучи всегда эмоционально окрашенными, они вызывают побуждение и мотивации, находящиеся в сознании до знакомства с новым продуктом и зависящие от фоновых знаний, таких как субъективный опыт, воспоминания, ценности, предпочтения и тому подобное. В этом случае потребительское поведение не является рациональным, так как истинные реакции мозга субъективны. Приобретая вещи, человек как бы проецирует свои воспоминания, мечты и желания на вещи. Французский социолог Жан Бодрияр считает, что потребление – это акт социально-психологического значения, в котором рациональность вещей борется с иррациональностью потребностей, и как из этого противоречия возникает система значений, пытающаяся его разрешить. Таким образом, потребитель покупает не вещи, а культурные знаки, дающие ему дополнительные смыслы, такие как защищенность, уверенность, статусность, модность, престиж и так далее, которые, по мнению Жана Бодрияра, составляют более или менее связанный дискурс, деятельность систематического манипулирования знаками. Складывается целое направление маркетинговая лингвистика, объектом которой можно считать маркетинговый дискурс, включающий рекламные тексты, слоганы, наименования и вербальные компоненты логотипов. С помощью речевых конструкций происходит воздействие на человека на уровне его нервно-психологических процессов. Создаются дополнительные смыслы и коннотации, которые имеют целью неявно воздействовать на покупателя соответственно целям говорящего. Так, цвета могут благоухать, производить впечатление колючего или неровного, опасного или комфортного. Под воздействием света предметы могут визуально казаться большего или меньшего объема. Например, товары в белой упаковке воспринимаются более легкими, чем товары в черной упаковке. При этом при выборе цвета рекламного продукта учитывается пол, возраст и культурно-социальные характеристики потребителя, так как реакции на цвет во многом определены физиологией человека и культурно-социальным окружением. Отмечается, что мужчины и женщины различают разное количество цветовых оттенков, а с возрастом человек предпочитает более спокойные цвета, чем в молодом возрасте. Также цветовые ассоциации потребителей могут различаться в зависимости от культурной традиции или социальной принадлежности. Например, по-французски «habit vert», дословно «зеленая одежда», обозначает члена французской академии. «Talon rouge» – красный каблук придворного королевского двора, а «pervenche» в переводе «барвинок» обозначает подразделение женской полиции во Франции. Таким образом, цвет представляет собой определенную функцию восприятия, которая позволяет сообщить определенные знания об объекте. Потребители выбирают нужные товары по конкретному цвету, который делает эти товары узнаваемыми. Например, товары гигиены голубого цвета, биологические продукты питания зеленого, товары по сниженным ценам красного. Выбор цветовой гаммы не является произвольным для производителя, а представляет продуманную коммуникационную стратегию. Например, в парфюмерной промышленности синий цвет ассоциируется с морем и передает коннотации, такие как независимость, сила. Зеленый ассоциируется с растительностью и создает коннотации свежесть, природа, здоровье. Красный цвет, ассоциируясь с огнем, передает коннотации страсти, любовь и, в принципе, сильные переживания. Номинация цвета участвует в процессе формирования у потребителя положительного образа. Потребность наделять предметы цветовыми оттенками, по мнению Ролана Барта, заключается в понимании цвета как обещание удовольствия, promesse d'un plaisir по-французски, которое сходно с получением удовольствия от ощущения аппетита. В свою очередь, Жан Бодрияр полагает, что образ, знак и все то, что мы потребляем, это наше душевное спокойствие и стремление к ощущению счастья, которое мы ищем, спасаясь от стрессов окружающего мира. Ощущение душевного комфорта напрямую связано с положительной эмотивной информацией, которая передается с помощью цветонаименований. Для современного потребителя важны такие характеристики, как стиль, мода, оригинальность и эстетика, которые являются значимыми атрибутами быта современного француза и константами французской культуры. Во французской культуре стремление к эстетике и получению облагороженного наслаждения жизнью отражается в особом стиле savoir-vivre или умение жить. В результате нашего анализа номинативной цветовой семантики товаров повседневного спроса устанавливается, что при номинации цвет используется в качестве положительного мотива. Потребительским товарам дают экспрессивные нетрадиционные цветонаименования путем создания ярких, запоминающихся образов для привлечения внимания покупателей. Например, rouge provocation, по-французски провоцирующий красный, или sable émouvant, цвет волнующегося песка, или marron ensoleillé, солнечный каштан, соответствует светло-коричневому оттенку. Зафиксированы цветообозначения, передающие различные цветовые оттенки в основе сравнения с фруктами, цветами, природными явлениями, материалами и артефактами, многие из которых присутствуют в словарях, например, pomme verte, зеленое яблоко, или ваниль, ванильный цвет, тюлипа, цвет тюльпана, jaune printemps, желтый весенний. Однако потребность в отражении многочисленных цветовых оттенков в сфере потребления диктует необходимость создания более сложных ассоциативных образов, выступающих в качестве художественно-выразительного средства и передающих не только цвет, но и впечатление, оценку, эмоции, что сближает номинацию цвета потребительских товаров с наименованием цвета в художественной литературе, воздействующим на эмоциональную сферу. Например, вот такие цветообозначения, по-французски это «зефир д'Ivoire», цвет слоновой кости или караван де саблю, песчаный караван, называют не только цветовой оттенок, но и провоцируют потребителя на когнитивную деятельность. Оригинальная номинация цветового оттенка может содержать как новую информацию о предмете, так и активизировать через абстрактные ассоциативные образы приятные воспоминания и переживания, отражающие ценностные предпочтения и эмоциональные запросы современного покупателя в обыденной жизни. Например, цветообозначение «soupçon de rose» – «розовое сомнение» по-русски, или «grisage» – «серый мудрый», «glace de pêche» – «холодный персик». Итак, в результате слияния разных ментальных пространств или концептуальной интеграции образуются метафорические конструкции, передающие новые смыслы, которые стимулируют воображение потребителя. Например, в названиях цвета косметической продукции Chanel зафиксированы различные коннотации розового цвета, отражающие удовольствие. Например, rose désirable, розовый желанный, или комфорт, douceur beige, бежевая мягкость, страсть, фюшья irrésistible, в переводе на русский неудержимая фуксия. Оттенки розового могут сравниваться с нежностью персика, со звездами, шепотом, мечтой и даже снежной бурей. Оттенки красного цвета передаются с помощью сравнений с любовью, драконом, пиратами, лотосом, сонатой, фениксом и даже с кинематографом. Вот по-французски здесь, кто владеет французским, можете прочитать. Да? Amour, coup de cœur, pirate, rouge flamboyant и так далее. Синий сравнивается с океаном, бурей, кровной местью, океан, океанический синий, orage, темно-синий, bleu satin, синий глянцевый, где акцент смещается с цвета на блеск, и vendetta, кровная месть, который соответствует темно-синему цвету. Бежевый сравнивается со сновидениями, songe, или с секретом, secret. При исследовании номинаций цветовых оттенков красок для интерьера марки Deluxe Valentine нами обнаружены многочисленные ассоциативные связи с продуктами питания. Например, желтый ассоциируется с лимонным сорбетом, со взбитыми сливками, с ванилью, с медом и передает коннотации свет, яркость, тепло. Различные оттенки бежевого возникают через сравнение с печеньем, капучино, зефиром с оттенком слоновой кости, сливками, нежным миндалем или миндальным зернышком и передают коннотацию комфорт, естественность. Коричневый ассоциируется с кофе с пенкой, молоком или сливками, кофейным зернышком, какао, шоколадом, лакомым трюфелем, с обжаренным миндалем, миндальным печеньем и создает коннотацию надежность, классика, натуральность. Фиолетовый имеет коннотации элемент качества и тонкий вкус, которые реализуются в цветообозначениях крем де кассис, джем из черной смородины. В современном обществе глобализация и межкультурная коммуникация сопровождаются процессом интеграции различных концептов и соединением разных концептуальных понятий в человеческом сознании, в результате которых происходит создание нетипичных цветовых номинаций, в которых в качестве цветового референта используются факты неродной культуры и глобального мира. В качестве примера для исследования выбраны цветообозначения товаров повседневного спроса, цветовая номинация которых рассматривается сквозь призму культурного взаимодействия и эмоционально-оценочных предпочтений носителей современного французского языка. Например, Например, при рассмотрении названий красок для интерьера нами обнаружены следующие цветообозначения. Например, оттенок серого, gris building, да, серый цвет зданий, или gris hammam, серый цвет хамама. Оттенок красного, rouge madras, соответствует красному женскому головному убору, да, и возникают такие восточные коннотации. Lanterne chinoise, цвет китайского фонарика, то есть это тоже оттенок красного цвета, который отсылает нас тоже к китайской культуре. Rose Barbie, розовый цвет куклы Барби. Или Хэллоуин, это оттенок оранжевого цвета по аналогии с цветом тыквы, который используется для этого праздника. Coton d'Égypte, египетский хлопок. Или Кения Клэр, кенийский светлый, дословно оттенок светлого цвета, который, видимо, ассоциируется с какими-то кенийскими пейзажами. Australie Pastel, австралийский пастельный. Таким образом, цвет создает коннотации с различными предметами и объектами действительности, в которых макрокомпонент значения включает в себя наряду с образно-ассоциативным комплексом и мотивную модальность, и стилистическую выразительность. Образы, транслируемые через цветообозначение французских товаров потребительского спроса, позволяют судить об эстетических предпочтениях сквозь призму французской культуры, а именно особого стиля французской жизни savoir-vivre. Вследствие такого комплексного отражения действительности через внутренний мир человека цветовые коннотации используются маркетологами для соблазнения покупателя и продвижения товара. Спасибо большое за внимание, у меня все.
Спасибо большое, Елена Юрьевна, за ваше выступление. Уважаемые конференции, есть ли вопросы к нашему спикеру? Напоминаю, вы также можете поднять ручку или написать вопрос в чат. Я так понимаю, что вопросов нет. There are no questions. Thank you. And now I would like to request all the participants to switch on your camera. It is need to take a print screen for our next report. Please, could you switch on your cameras? And one more. So, thank you. And now, that was our last speakers for today and for our plenary session. And our conference will continue here on Microsoft Teams at 12 p.m. and we'll divide it into two sections: PR campaigns examples, tactics, strategies, and measure of success, and international public relations. And I sent you the links for the next sessions in the chat. And you can find the links. And thank you for your attention. See you in the sections 1 and 2.